The Dominion of Kalara had known no equals across the galaxy. Their warships blazed through star systems like a storm, swallowing everything in their path. Their generals never knew defeat, and their people had grown complacent in the belief that no force could challenge them. Their empire stretched across the stars in a perfect tapestry of conquest and subjugation. They had taken hundreds of planets over millennia, each new system bending under the weight of their relentless ambition. They had erased entire civilizations from existence, without hesitation or remorse, leaving only ashes in their wake. And as they swept across the galaxy, their dominance became an unchallenged truth. The Kalara were no mere conquerors, they were gods among lesser beings, and nothing could stand in their way. Their technology was unrivaled, their warriors legendary, and their fleets a force of destruction beyond imagination. The very mention of Kalara struck fear into the hearts of the galaxy's inhabitants. All who had encountered them either surrendered or were wiped from existence. Those who resisted were crushed with ruthless efficiency until all were brought into the fold of their vast empire. But on the edge of their territory, at the furthest reaches of their domain, a single unknown signal began to ping across their deep space sensors. It was faint at first and dismissed as a fluke, perhaps a rogue asteroid or a failing satellite. No one took it seriously at first, no one but the lowest-ranking officers, who found themselves glancing nervously at the readings before they erased the data and moved on until the signal persisted, growing clearer and more defined. It wasn't a natural anomaly. It was deliberate and unmistakable in its precision. The Kalara fleet commanders decided to investigate it themselves, dispatching a small scout ship to the location where the signal had originated. The ship moved through the black emptiness of space, guided by only the pale light of distant stars. As it approached the origin of the signal, the crew could feel the weight of something unnatural in the air. The tension was palpable, like the moments before the battle began. But still they found nothing, no hidden fleet, no enemy, no weapon ready to strike, just the cold quiet of space, stretching on forever. Until the moment it happened. Without warning, the small scout ship registered an anomaly ahead, a blip of movements so fast that the ship's sensors barely caught it, a fleeting shadow against the backdrop of stars. The crew reacted instantly, their hands racing over controls to track the mysterious object. But it was gone before they could even blink. It didn't make sense. How could something move that quickly? How could they have missed it? How could it disappear with no trace? And then the message came, a simple transmission that pierced through their communication systems like a dagger. The words were brief and unrelenting. It was a single line broadcasted across every Kalara ship's communication channel, across their entire fleet, without any warning. We are humanity, and we do not bow to conquerors. And in that moment, everything changed. The crew of the scout ship stared at the transmission in disbelief. It made no sense. How could something so bold and defiant come from the far reaches of unknown space? The question hung in the air as the ship's captain gripped the command console, and the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable next move. The Kalara fleet commanders were quick to respond to the message from humanity. Their initial disbelief shifted to anger, and then confusion. How could any race speak to them in such a manner? They were the Kalara, the rulers of the galaxy. The very thought of an unknown species issuing such a demand was an insult. Their pride had been wounded, and they were determined to show that no one, not even the humans, could challenge their might. Fleet commanders ordered an immediate investigation, sending out an entire battalion of warships to track down this human vessel and annihilate it. The Kalara warships were massive and imposing. Their sleek, dark hulls reflected the stars like weapons of destruction. Each ship bristled with advanced weapon systems that could tear entire planets apart with ease. But this time there was no immediate battle. Instead, there was only silence. The Kalara warships searched every inch of the region where the human warship was last detected, but there was nothing except the emptiness of space. The humans were nowhere to be found. Their ships hovered like dark sentinels, searching the vast expanse for any sign of life, any clue to the intruder's presence. And yet nothing came, no trace, no heat signature, no movement. There was no sign of a ship that could elude them so easily. It was impossible to fathom. Their scanners were second to none. How could something so elusive escape detection? The fleet commanders felt their unease grow as minutes stretched into hours without a single clue. They ordered the warships to scatter and search deeper into the outer reaches of the system, where the human warship might have hidden. But just as quickly as they had begun their search, it happened. The human warship appeared again. Only this time, it wasn't on their sensors or tracking systems. It wasn't on anything at all. It just appeared, a deep space vessel with no warning, no sign of movement, no indication of its approach. It was there one moment and gone the next, as if it had existed in the very fabric of space itself. Yet there it was, hovering right in front of the flagship, a looming shadow so close that the captain could feel a chill run down their spine as the massive warship filled their view screen, its dark surface reflecting nothing except the coldness of the void. A single human ship against an entire fleet, and yet it felt as if they were the ones who were surrounded. They tried to raise the warship on communications, but the response was the same, a single line: "We are humanity, and we do not bow to conquerors." The words echoed through the Calera flagship, like a challenge, like a warning that they had underestimated something they could never understand. The Calera commanders were furious, but they also knew that this was no ordinary foe. Their warships were powerful, their fleets vast. But whatever this human warship was, it was not something they could simply crush with sheer numbers. Something about its presence was unsettling. It didn't react, it didn't engage, it didn't fight. It simply existed in a way that defied everything the Calera believed about war and power. And for the first time in centuries, the Calera generals hesitated. They ordered their fleets to hold back, unsure of how to proceed. And that hesitation lingered like a shadow over the fleet as they slowly realized that they weren't just facing a new enemy, they were facing something that had completely rewritten the rules of warfare, something that was neither afraid nor impressed by the mighty Calera Empire. As the Calera fleet hesitated, uncertainty gnawed at the hearts of their commanders. The vastness of their empire and the brilliance of their warriors had never before encountered such a force. Even the most seasoned Calera generals began to question everything they had ever known about war and strategy. The human warship had done nothing but appear and speak its message with calm defiance, and yet it had shaken the entire fleet to its core. There was no fear in the humans, no sense of panic or retreat, just an unsettling calm that made the Calera uneasy. They couldn't track it, couldn't predict its movements. And that alone made it more dangerous than any fleet they had ever faced in their entire history. The human warship moved again, but this time it did not slip past their sensors. It didn't vanish into the void. It simply remained where it was, hovering just beyond the reach of Calera weaponry. Their ships moved to engage, but no matter how they tried to lock onto it, the human vessel simply vanished from their targeting systems, as though it had never been there to begin with. The Calera fleet commanders issued orders to fire all weapons, but as their fleets unleashed salvo after salvo of energy bolts and missiles into the void, nothing struck the target. The human warship remained untouched, like a ghost dancing just outside their reach. No explosion, no impact, no sign of damage. In fact, it seemed to be mocking them. The sheer precision of the human vessel's movements left the Calera generals feeling like they were children trying to catch a phantom in the dark. Nothing made sense, and with every failed attempt to strike the human ship, their confidence eroded bit by bit. It became clear that brute force was not the answer. The Calera were used to winning through overwhelming might, not through cunning and trickery. But with each battle, the human ship seemed to be toying with them, like a cat with its prey, just waiting for the moment to strike. They were frustrated beyond measure. Their pride had been bruised, and the very thought that a single human warship could defy them in such a manner gnawed at their spirits. The message came again, and this time it was different. It was a challenge, one that burned through their communication systems and straight into the hearts of every Calera officer. "We are humanity, and we do not bow to conquerors." And then a shift, something subtle but undeniable, happened across the fleet, a change in attitude that spread from ship to ship. It wasn't just fear anymore. It wasn't just frustration now. There was something else, something that had never been seen in the Calera Empire. A sense of confusion had taken root, an uncomfortable awareness that maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated humanity. Maybe they had overlooked something about this species that could not be explained away by brute strength or superior technology. The warships of the Kalara gathered around their flagship in formation, ready to strike one last blow, but still the human ship waited unmoving, silently observing from its place in the deep dark of space. Their command crew aboard the flagship held their breath, every officer focused on the screens, knowing that something monumental was about to happen, and that the next move would determine the fate of the galaxy itself. The Kalara fleet, now assembled in a tightly knit formation around their flagship, had one goal: to destroy the human warship. Their weapons were primed, their fleets bristling with lethal power, ready to tear through the emptiness of space. The flagship's captain stared at the communication screen, his fingers trembling over the controls as he watched the human ship float ominously before them, still silent, still unmoving. It was as if the ship itself was waiting for something that the Kalara couldn't understand. It made the captain's skin crawl. His pride told him to strike immediately, but there was something in the air, something that made him hesitate. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but an intense sense of uncertainty. And uncertainty was a dangerous thing in the face of a foe that was impossible to predict. The fleet commanders had grown desperate. They ordered their ships to move into position, to launch everything they had in a single unified strike that would finally force the human ship into submission. The massive Kalara ships opened fire simultaneously, unleashing a barrage of laser beams, plasma bolts, and missiles. Enough firepower to wipe out entire planetary defenses. Every weapon they had, every ounce of their destructive potential was aimed at that one target. The human warship didn't even flinch. As the weapons tore through space, striking where the human warship had once been, a shocking realization struck. The ship wasn't there anymore. In an instant, it had disappeared, vanished into the void without a trace. It was as though the human warship had never been there at all. The fleet commanders stared in disbelief, watching the empty void where the ship had once lingered, waiting for it to reappear. But there was no sign of the enemy. No wreckage. No damage. Just silence. The human warship had once again outsmarted them, slipping away in the blink of an eye. It didn't make sense. How could something so simple evade all their most advanced technology? The Kalara had never faced a foe like this. They were the masters of space, and yet they couldn't land a single blow on this human vessel. It wasn't just a matter of tactics or technology. It felt like they were playing a game against an opponent who knew the rules better than they did, a game that they were doomed to lose. Panic began to spread among the fleet commanders. The pride that had once unified them was slowly being replaced with doubt. How could they possibly defeat an enemy they couldn't even touch? How could they fight something that seemed to move faster than thought, always one step ahead of them? The question echoed in every officer's mind. What kind of ship was this? What kind of species could defy them so effortlessly? On board the flagship, the captain was losing control of his crew. Officers scrambled for answers, but there were none. A quiet voice spoke up from the comm station, its tone tense. "It's back." The human warship had reappeared. But this time, it wasn't just a mere presence in space. The ship was transmitting a message again. But this time it was longer, and its words were sharper, more direct. "You've made your move, Kalara. Now it's time to end this." The fleet commanders exchanged looks of confusion. This wasn't just a threat. It was a statement. The humans had clearly known what was going to happen. They had anticipated the Kalara's every action from the very beginning. The realization hit them all at once. They weren't just fighting for survival. The humans were playing a game they had already won. The Kalara fleet had been driven to the edge of madness by the relentless frustration of facing an enemy that couldn't be caught or destroyed. Their fleet commanders had always prided themselves on their ability to dominate space, to crush enemies with overwhelming force. And yet here they were, stranded in a never-ending game of cat and mouse with a single human warship that continued to slip through their grasp With disturbing ease, they tried every strategy they could think of. They sent fleets to trap it, they launched fighter jets to scout and disable it. They even tried to predict its movements using the most advanced algorithms in the galaxy, but still the human warship eluded them, as if it were one step ahead. At all times, the calmness of the human ship only added to the unease. Each time they failed, it was as though the human ship wasn't just evading them. It was teaching them a lesson in humility. But this time, the Kalara were not ready to accept defeat. Without a final confrontation, they gathered their remaining forces around their flagship in a last-ditch attempt to corner and destroy the human vessel. They poured every resource they had into this battle, every shred of their military might, and for the first time, the Kalara fleet moved as one. Their ships positioned themselves in an intricate formation designed to block every possible escape route for the human warship. With their weapons primed and their hearts filled with a rare fury, they were finally ready to end this. The flagship captain, a veteran of countless campaigns, stared at the main view screen with a grim expression. This time, there would be no tricks, no escape. The human warship would be destroyed in a final display of Kalara's superiority. The orders were given, and the battle began. The fleet unleashed an overwhelming barrage of energy weapons, missiles, and every form of firepower they had to bear. The very space around them seemed to crackle with the force of the attack. But once again, the human warship was nowhere to be found. The Kalara ships tracked the blasts with their sensors, and for a split second they thought they had scored a hit. But then the signal vanished. It was gone again before they could even register a hit, as if the very fabric of reality had swallowed it whole. Their commanders were now in a frenzy, and their desperation became palpable. Where did it go? One officer shouted, "It's right in front of us." Another screamed, but still, there was nothing. The human warship had disappeared again, but this time it didn't reappear in a distant corner of space. Like before, it was directly in front of them, hovering within the range of their weapons, and yet it hadn't been detected in any of their tracking systems. How was this possible? How could a ship that had been right in front of them vanish without a trace, only to reappear just as quickly? The answer came too late. The human warship fired without warning a single shot that tore through the flagship's shields as though they were made of paper. The blast cut through the entire hull, taking out the primary systems and knocking the flagship's engines offline in a single devastating blow. The Kalara fleet was paralyzed in shock as the flagship drifted helplessly in space. The realization hit them all like a wave. The humans weren't playing at all. They had won, and they hadn't even needed to fire another shot. It had all been a game of patience, of waiting for the right moment to strike, and now that moment had come. The human warship had shown them just how outmatched they were. The Kalara fleet hung in space like a wounded animal, reeling from the unexpected destruction of their flagship. The once mighty vessel now a floating carcass drifting helplessly in the void. The atmosphere aboard the flagship was thick with tension and disbelief. Even as the remaining Kalara ships tried to regroup, their confidence had been shattered. The pride they had once held so firmly was now a distant memory. All that remained was a sinking realization. They had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and outthought by a force they could not comprehend. The human warship had not only survived every attempt to destroy it, but had shown them the true meaning of warfare in a way that the Kalara could never have imagined. The human ship didn't fight with sheer power or brute force. It fought with intelligence, with strategy, with a cold precision that made every Kalara ship feel like a lumbering giant struggling to catch a shadow. The battle, it seemed, had already been decided from the start. The human ship wasn't just a vessel of war. It was an extension of its creator's will, an embodiment of their ability to adapt, to think, and to survive in ways the Kalara had never seen before. The remaining commanders of the fleet gathered in the war room of their flagship, their voices low and filled with desperation. "We must regroup," one of the senior officers said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep fighting like this. This is not a war anymore. We're just waiting to die." There was a grim silence as the others absorbed his words. The fleet was in disarray, and the human warship was still out there, watching, waiting for their next move. But what could they do? How could they fight something that had already proven itself to be so far beyond them? The feeling of helplessness spread like a poison, and soon the thought crossed every officer's mind. What if the humans weren't just an unstoppable force? What if they were also an inevitable one? Their ability to adapt, to learn, to outwit every strategy they had thrown at them had only one possible conclusion. The humans would not stop until they had done exactly what they had set out to do, and the Kalara Empire would be nothing more than a forgotten relic of history, a memory erased by a species too stubborn to submit. They hadn't even fought with destruction in mind. They hadn't come to wage war. They had come to teach a lesson, one the Kalara would never forget. The message that had once seemed like an empty boast now took on a much darker meaning. We are humanity, and we do not bow to conquerors. The Kalara had heard it, seen it, felt it in their very bones. That message wasn't just defiance. It was a declaration. It was a warning that no matter how far the Kalara Empire stretched, no matter how many planets they conquered or systems, they claimed the human race would never kneel to them, and they would never be intimidated by their power. The human warship didn't just represent a challenge, it represented the ultimate test of their belief in their own supremacy. And the Kalara were failing it. They could no longer deny that the humans had already won, and now it was just a matter of time before they made their victory. Undeniable, the question that remained was how long would it take before the Kalara finally accepted the truth that the galaxy no longer belonged to them. The silence in the war room was suffocating. The weight of their defeat pressed down on each officer, and the realization of their impotence was a collective burden that no one could bear alone. Eyes flicked to the view screen where the last of the Kalara ships hung like fragile beads in the vastness of space. But no movement was made, no orders given. It was as if the fleet had frozen in time, paralyzed by their failure. Captain Vale, the highest-ranking officer left aboard the flagship, finally broke the stillness. His voice was cold and clipped, a sharp contrast to the turmoil that churned inside him. We cannot afford to sit idly by, waiting for our extinction. We must act. His words hung in the air like a challenge, yet they felt empty. The fleet had been reduced to nothing more than a handful of ships, scattered across the galaxy like lost pieces of a broken puzzle. "What would you have us do, Captain?" one of the junior officers asked, his tone heavy with resignation. "We've seen what the humans are capable of. Any attempt to fight them directly is futile." Val's fists clenched at his sides. His pride, once unshakable, now felt like a curse. He had trained for this, prepared for a battle that now seemed inconceivable. He had fought alongside the best and been the best, but the human warship had proven every assumption, every strategy, every advantage wrong. The question now was not whether they could win, it was whether they could survive. "We don't fight them head-on," Vale replied, his eyes narrowing with the hint of a plan. "We learn from them." The officers exchanged confused glances. Learn from them? How do we learn from the enemy who has already beaten us at every turn? An officer asked, the skepticism in his voice clear. Val's gaze drifted to the wreckage of their flagship, the broken hull slowly rotating in space, a testament to their failure. "We survived long enough to learn. The humans did not defeat us with firepower alone. They defeated us with tactics, with adaptability. We need to understand that. If we are to have any hope of victory, we must study them, not as conquerors, but as survivors." He turned to the tactical officer, a young Kalara with the fire of youth still burning in her eyes. "I want you to study every move the humans made, every maneuver, every decision. We must understand them inside and out. Maybe then we can turn the tables." The officer hesitated, but then nodded slowly. "Yes, Captain. I'll begin immediately." Vale stepped away from the table, his mind spinning with the possibilities. He had always believed that the Kalara were the superior force in the galaxy, that their technology, their intelligence, their will to dominate was unmatched. Yet now, faced with the undeniable reality that they were outclassed, he felt a new kind of desperation rising within him, a desperation to learn, to adapt, to survive. As the officers scattered to their stations, Val's gaze lingered on the view screen, his thoughts racing. He couldn't let go of the nagging question that haunted him. Could the Kalara ever truly defeat the humans, or had their own arrogance led them down a path from which there was no return? Only one thing was certain now: the game had changed. And in this new reality, survival would demand more than brute force. It would demand the kind of ingenuity that only the humans had shown. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was something the Kalara could learn to wield in their own favor. The galaxy stood at a precipice, teetering between two vastly different futures, and the Kalara could do nothing but watch as the finality of their defeat sank in like a weight pressing down on their collective soul. Their once mighty empire, which spanned countless worlds, had crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance and the unyielding resolve of the humans. The last remnants of the Kalara fleet hovered motionless in space, their commanders no longer sure of their own place in the galaxy. The human warship, now a symbol of something far greater than military might, had not destroyed them outright. It had done something far worse. It had shown them that the galaxy didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to those who were willing to live, to adapt, to grow together. The human message had been clear and unyielding. The era of conquest was over. The era of cooperation was just beginning. The Kalara officers, still aboard their remaining ships, faced an uncertain future. They had nothing left to fight for, no more systems to conquer, no more populations to subjugate. They had lost everything: their power, their pride, their place in the galaxy. And now they had to face the consequences of their actions. Some of them still clung to the old ways, to the idea that they could rebuild what had been lost, that they could somehow restore the Kalara Empire to its former glory. But deep down, they knew it was over. They knew that their attempts to force their way into the future had been futile. The galaxy had already changed, and there was no turning back. A new era was dawning, one where humanity would no longer be a species to be conquered, but one to build the future alongside the other races. The Kalara could no longer ignore the truth. They had been defeated, and they would not be given the chance to rule again. The last Kalara commander, who had once commanded the flagship, now nothing more than a drifting hulk, slowly turned to face the crew in the chamber. Their eyes were tired, hollow, haunted by the knowledge of their inevitable downfall. He stood, though the weight of his own failure seemed to hold him down like a shackle. He spoke softly, not with anger, but with something far more painful. "We were wrong. The galaxy does not belong to us." His voice cracked, the words like poison on his tongue. The room fell into silence as the officers finally accepted the weight of his words, each one coming to terms with the collapse of their empire. Outside the window of their ship, the human warship appeared once again. It had not attacked, it had not moved in for the kill. Instead, it simply hovered there in the vastness of space, a silent sentinel watching over the fleet. The humans had won not with violence, but with a quiet, unyielding determination. They had shown the Kalara what it meant to be truly strong, not to dominate, not to conquer, but to endure and build something greater together. The message from the human ship was the same as it had always been: the galaxy is not for the taking, it is for the making. The Kalara fleet, once so full of pride and ambition, finally understood the truth humanity had taught them, and as their warships drifted away, no longer in formation, but scattered and broken, the last vestiges of the Kalara Empire faded into the dark corners of history. The galaxy had a new master now, but it was not a single race, nor a single power. It was a galaxy united, one that would be shaped by those who chose to create, not destroy. And though the Kalara might never fully recover, their empire no longer mattered. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy belonged to all its people, not just the conquerors, and that truth would echo for generations to come.